A very warm welcome to the Mental Health Commission of Canada's webinar on mental health and suicide prevention for men. My name is Ed Mantler and I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Program Officer with the Mental Health Commission of Canada. My background clinically is in psychiatric nursing, and I've had the pleasure of working in the mental health field for many decades now. With the Mental Health Commission, I have the opportunity to work on a variety of projects and programs promoting mental health and substance use health well-being, including our suicide prevention programs. I want to acknowledge that the head office of the Mental Health Commission of Canada is located on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people in what's now called Ottawa. We acknowledge that for thousands of years, the Algonquin people have protected these lands as well as the Ottawa River watershed and its tributaries. As a national organization, we also acknowledge that we work on the traditional territories of many different nations. And for those of you joining today, I encourage you to acknowledge the land from which you're joining in the chat feature on screen. Today, A Path to Truth and Reconciliation begins with recognizing both the stewardship and sacrifices of the original peoples. We are committed to recognizing the errors of the past, acknowledging the challenges of the present, and contributing to a new and equitable relationship with First Peoples. I'd like to acknowledge that most of you joining today have a personal or professional connection to suicide and the work of suicide prevention. When we hear the tragic news of a loss of a friend, family member, neighbor, or colleague to suicide, we're reminded of how important the work of life promotion and suicide prevention really is. If anyone is in need of support during or after the webinar, we're able to offer you distance support through Mental Health First Aid, and just shortly I'll provide a bit more detail on that. As you may know, the month of November is an important time to discuss and learn about men's health. And each year, the Movember campaign is launched during this time to spark conversations about health priorities for men, which can include prostate cancer, mental health, and suicide prevention, among many others. Many of us take the time during November to reflect on the lives of men we have lost to suicide and the many men still fighting for a way forward. We chose to host this webinar during this important month to spark our own conversations about mental health and suicide prevention for men, and we're pleased to have you join us for this really important event. As we hear the reflections and perspectives of our panelists today and reflect on the important work that's been done and still needs to be done on suicide prevention for men, we encourage you to reflect on how we stand shoulder to shoulder in partnership and in community to prevent men from dying by suicide. The term shoulder to shoulder is something we hear about in suicide prevention. It quite literally means standing to shoulder with someone while inviting them into a conversation about a difficult topic. Some research suggests that shoulder to shoulder approaches are more effective for helping men open up in conversation about suicide and mental health. We chose this title for our webinar to reflect on the importance of working together to prevent suicide in ways that are effective for men. Today's suicide is going to include a discussion with our esteemed panelists, and we'll have a short 5-minute break after the panel discussion, and then give you the opportunity for some questions and answers through the chat and Q&A features of the technology. Throughout the presentation today, you'll see some polling questions coming up periodically on the screen. These are solely to help us to gather information about our audience and will be used internally for our own understanding of the audience, as well as and will be kept anonymous. So all of your responses will be anonymous. We're pleased to offer the webinar in both official languages. So today's webinar is presented in English with simultaneous French translation. You can connect to the French audio by clicking on Interpretation at the bottom of your screen and selecting French as your language. If you have any technical problems, please write them in the chat and we'll do our best to assist you. And if you'd like to follow along to the slides in French, select the presenter with French presentation. The view option menu on top of the screen provides a list of presenters sharing their screen. The slider between the speaker's camera and the English slides can be adjusted to move to the left in order to view better the French slides. And please feel free to answer your questions in the language, ask your questions in the language of your choice at any time in the chat. You can do so by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen or using the chat box. Questions will be answered during the question and answer period at the end of the presentations, just after we take a break. And for ease of reference, please indicate which speaker your question is directed to, or if it applies to all speakers when we come to that time. So as I mentioned, talking about suicide can really be an emotionally heavy topic. Normally, when we host an in-person event, we would have on-site support for anyone who feels triggered or needs some support. Today, we're able to offer you distance supports through Mental Health First Aid and Wellness Together Canada. I invite you to take note of the distress line numbers for your region or the contact information of Joshua Bauer, who is available to provide distance mental health support. Joshua is available by email and he can provide support in English or French. He'll be available for support throughout the webinar and up until 3:30 Eastern Time. We'll put his contact information as well as some additional information in the chat box. And please don't hesitate to reach out to your local crisis center or distress line if you need support. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you our esteemed panelists for today's webinar, and I'm so grateful to all for joining us. We have the pleasure of being joined by experts in the field of mental health and suicide prevention who focus on men and boys, and who will share their perspectives and experiences so that we can all better understand how to prevent men's suicide. The topic of today's webinar include lived experience, successful research programs, community initiatives, and what's needed to advance efforts in men's suicide prevention. So first we have Dr. John Ogrodnichuk. Dr. Ogrodnichuk is a professor of psychiatry and director of the UBC psychotherapy program, which is one of North America's largest medically based psychotherapy training programs. His research focuses on a variety of psychotherapies in patient populations with a particular focus on personalities disorders and men's mental health. John has held several grants to support his research and has over 300 publications. He's the past president of the North American chapter of the International Society for Psychotherapy Research, the founder of Heads Up Guys, and a leading global, which is a leading global resource for supporting men with depression. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Ed. I'm not sure what else to say about myself for an introduction. I've been in the space of working with men and supporting their mental health for probably about 25 years now. Clinically, it's always been a significant focus of my work. And in fact, right now, and for the past several years now, my clinical load is exclusively male, which makes me a bit unique in that regard. And about 15 years ago, John Olive, a colleague here at UBC, he and I started Canada's first, and I think still only, men's mental health research program. And since that time, it's evolved to become an international effort where we have colleagues now in Australia, Switzerland, Germany, the United States. So we're really proud of that effort. And with Heads Up Guys, what started as something that we were hoping could be a national resource has really grown to become indeed a global resource, and a leading one at that, where we get traffic visitors from all over the world. I think illustrating that there's a gaping chasm when it comes to men's mental health services and resources. And I think it's also a testament to the fact that, what we're providing men with is really resonating with them. And so month after month, we're getting more and more people coming out to us. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to turn it back to you, Ed.
Great, thank you so much for those words, John. Next, we have Jonathan Reed. Jonathan is a youth program manager with Next Gen Men. He's currently finishing a Master of Education focused on boyhood masculinities, creates a podcast on the inner lives of boys called Breaking the Boy Code, and works tirelessly to support boys' well-being and challenge gender-based violence. Most recently, he was named a finalist for the Best Contribution to Youth Engagement Award, and congratulations on that. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you. So I'm Jonathan, pronouns are he and him. I'm calling from Ontario. And I guess how I would like to begin with, I would say, as a kid, I kind of experienced the intersection of gender-based violence and mental health struggles. So I was like pretty small. I had long hair, and for example, I got called a fag before I knew what a fag was. And so even at a really young age, I was like, there's something unjust about who I can be and how I can express myself because of those societal tenets of masculinity. And as I was preparing to do my Bachelor of Education, I heard about a 12-year-old named Ronan Shimizu in California who had been part of his school's cheerleading team. And he was 12 years old, and he was bullied, and he died by suicide. And that really hit me, really hard, because when I was 12 years old, I was part of my school's cheerleading team, and and I got bullied for it. And he died and I didn't. And that was something that I carried with me for several years, is that significance here. 1 second, I can change my audio input, I just noticed. Or I can just try talking. Tell me if this is a better audio, Melissa. Okay, appreciate it. Thanks for letting me know. So I was talking about this 12-year-old who was in a really similar life position in terms of facing gender-based violence and bullying as a kid, and he died and I didn't. He died by suicide, and that was something that was really, really powerful for me. And so when I started working as a teacher, I really had a sense that what I'm particularly passionate about is supporting the well-being of boys and challenging gender-based violence. And that's something that's one of the main things that brought me to Next Gen Men, which is an organization that works to engage boys and men on topics like mental health, healthy relationships, and gender equality. For the first couple of years, I'm in my 5th year with Next Gen Men, which is super awesome. And for the first couple of years, I was focused on delivering in-school programs, mostly with grade 7 and grade 8 boys. And that was sort of focused on the idea of individual transformation. What would be the impact of a boy having an opportunity to think about masculinity differently, and broaden that field of possibility for what it meant to become a man. And as the years went by delivering that program, we also started thinking about institutional transformations. So what would be the impact of the school itself, thinking about these kinds of things differently, and if that was part of their behavior management or the discipline practices or mental health supports. And so at this point, we're focused on professional development and sort of in terms of deepening the capacity of educators to be champions of positive masculinity within their school communities. And another really interesting thing that I'm working on that is really relevant for the conversation today is, over the pandemic, we started hosting a Discord server, which is an online platform, kind of like a multifaceted chat room that's really popular with young people. It's called Next Gen Men Boys Club, and it has around 100 youth across Ontario, Alberta, and British Columbia. And it's become this really unique corner of the internet where positivity and inclusion are just the baseline for how we treat each other. And I've seen some really remarkable peer support in that space. One of our youth who went to the hospital for a suicide attempt, and when he started out on like a Friday, he said, I'm in the hospital. He was upset, that he hadn't died. And over the span of a weekend, talking with me, talking with some of his peers, he yeah, he got to the place where he said, I'm going to go home and I'm going to make it through this. I'm going to be okay. So it's a pretty special place where, yeah, some really great work in terms of mental well-being happens. But I'll stop there. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Next, we're joined by Henry Morgan. Henry is a Mormon. Henry is a member of Gitxsan Nation. He serves on the board of directors for Dudes Club, and he's a staff member with the Indian Residential School Survivor Society. Henry is the co-founder of Whispering Pine Training and Consulting, which offers culturally humble and safe educational training and courses guided by existing land-based teachings and founded in Indigenous knowledge and practices. Over to you, Henry.
Good morning, good day. My name is Henry Morgan. My traditional name is Askusel. It just means happy. It was gifted to me by my auntie. And it's not really happy, more funny, but it's it allows our elders to recognize how I show my emotions or how I connect with others. And humor is one of the things that I do. I've lived and worked in Prince George for the last 27 years. I've worked in many aspects of homelessness, addictions, halfway houses. And a lot of that was with the Indigenous population, looking at the impacts of residential school. I myself, as a survivor of Indian Day School, and really, those impacts have guided me to where I am today, understanding the healing path that I'm on and how to look at suicide and suicide prevention, utilizing Indigenous practices. A lot of the times I find that when we throw the word Indigenous in front of something, it's very challenging for people to certify it or to create a space within today's society. So I'm actively providing workshops and looking at our spirit. We all have a spirit, and when we are on a healing path, we are able to connect with it in a stronger way and listen to the messages that are coming to us. And when I say that, is I think of the suicide ideations that we have. I look at the addiction when a person is struggling with addictions and they're hearing an echo in their mind of an example is, I'm going to harm someone because I was harmed as a child, right? So we have that echo in our head, and when we're in our addiction, that echo sits there and continues to go on day after day, especially if you're engaging in alcohol or drugs, that you will harm someone else and you are a product of abuse yourself, and you're going to continue that on with the next person. And I look at that, and I work with Indigenous men, and I look at anger. I look at the impacts of residential school. I look at our traditional wellness that we have currently, that we've always had and carried, and how to understand that our spirit is connecting with us, and how to have a conversation rather than looking at a vicarious piece that we've been witnessing on the movies or something that's happened in our community or someone within our family. I believe that the spirit is goes through that direction of the vicarious piece, because that's what is more prominent in our thoughts. But when we're in a wellness journey, we allow ourselves that opportunity to feel and think about a cultural response rather than a vicarious response. So an example of that is just, can we connect with the ideation without death, right? That's one of the concepts that I have, and looking at what is the medicine in the ideation. If an example is like if a person's looking down a bridge and looking at the water and they're contemplating going into the water, we have a conversation and we talk about what is down there, what wants to die. I know you don't want to die, but what wants to die, and what is it that you're wanting to connect with, and that's the water down below, and water is medicine. So we're able to respond with a traditional response that is unique to the individual, because we are talking with our brothers, our uncles, our fathers, our community members that we know. We are able to respond in a different manner culturally, and we have the capacity in community to respond to it, because living in rural communities, there is no access to psychologists, there is no access to sometimes RCMP or counselors. So when we look at capacity building in community, we are able to support our own immediately and not having to wait. Because once we create space, we remove that fear that we have that we are not able to sit with a person who has suicide ideation. So I'm very grateful to be a part of this today. I look at the panel and I'm excited to share my thoughts and be a part of this team. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. Our fourth panelist today is Dega Everest. Dega is a member of the Kanien'kehá:ka people of Kahnawake. He brings over 20 years experience in youth advocacy and engagement, cultural knowledge facilitation, and strategic program design. Dega advocates for a strength-based approach to community capacity building, emphasizing resilience and enhancement of cultural knowledge practices as a pillar to social innovation. He's the co-creator of Dudes Club. Over to you, Dega.
What when we're not doing so we're going to get it's an egg on your jets, Kanien'kehá:ka, Kahnawake, Ida Waganu, Dano Skirde, Sasko, and Wiki. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Dega Everest. I belong to the Kanien'kehá:ka Mohawk people of Kahnawake. I'm a proud member of our Bear Clan, specifically from our Susquehanna bloodline. And I'm honored to hold a capacity as not co-creator, but co-director of Dudes Club Society. And so a lot of the work that I focus on and Dudes Club Society focuses on is to ensure that the men are being supported in community to do the work. The work that Dudes Club Society takes on is the advocacy, the support. Really, when you see dudes clubs or men's health that are associated or interlinked with Dudes Club Society, the success of those sites, the success of those men, the pathways that they're forging and moving forward are really they need to be credited for their work. Really, we connect with nations. We have been incredibly fortunate, to start this initiative out as a small project under Canadian Men's Health Foundation back in 2010, with 3 of the co-founders who started this out, and from there, a lot of the project focused on social isolation, bringing men out of their sphere, their bubble, and engaging with men within the community. We know that social isolation is a major factor to men's health and wellness, and the impact that these individuals are experiencing in their own personal lives. And so if you can begin creating more of a support, creating more of a social scene, a gathering space that is designed for, led by, and supported by men, and then having the community around that, there's more opportunity for those men to come out and kind of drop their guard. As we say, it is leave your armor at the door and come into a space that is non-judgmental, that is supporting of the men, just to be there, just to have a meal served to them, connect through a social scene or games, activities, bingo, poker, crib, whatever those are, watch a game together and just enjoy a space with one another. That has resulted in incredible impacts for the downtown east side, which it initially started out in Vancouver downtown east side, which our flagship site is in. We had an incredible partnership with First Nations Health Authority that launched Dudes Club in and across British Columbia, with about 42 different sites within urban settings, the on reserve as well as off reserve. Dudes Club Society focuses on a Indigenous-led process to support men's health and wellness through strengthening a brotherhood. But it is open and welcoming, and we see a significant amount of diversity in the work that we do. 2/3 of participants in the respective sites are Indigenous. And I think one of the critical areas for us is identifying and having safe relationships, building relationships, and doing our work, as we call it, health by stealth. We know that a lot of men will not come forward and sit in a circle and talk about their feelings, let alone sit in a circle and talk about suicide prevention and awareness. So we have to find interesting ways to build relationship first and create a sense of trust and respect amongst that brotherhood, to welcome in those conversations. We have been incredibly successful to that. And we also noticed that our median age is about 42. And so we made a pivot back in 2020 to begin looking at how we are addressing youth within the respective communities. And as a result, we launched Next Up initiative, which is powered by Dudes Club Society. Again, that focuses on addressing the needs of our youth from age 15 or 14 to 35. We made a commitment to drop that level to 12 years old, because we began to identify that suicidality we're seeing it begin as early as 12 years old. And so the work that we do is ongoing, and I'm excited to share more about what we do and learn about more amazing initiatives here today. So, Go, thank you for the invitation.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Finally, I'm pleased to introduce Brandon Vecchiola. Brandon served in the Canadian Army, deployed to Kandahar, Afghanistan in 2008. Following his own mental health recovery, Brandon was inspired to continue serving by helping others through their recovery. He's worked as a peer support coordinator, a withdrawal management peer, a team leader at an adolescent addiction treatment center, board director for Indigenous Family Healing Services, an addiction counselor in a large addiction mental health service, and in private practice for his own growing service, Third Lotus Addiction Recovery Counseling. Over to you, Brandon.
Hi, Ed. Thank you. Thank you to all the other panelists for introducing themselves and telling everybody here all the amazing work that you're all doing. That's inspiring to hear, really. So I guess it is. What do I say? I guess I'll tell you a little bit about myself, where I'm from. I joined the Army when I was 18. That was what I wanted to do. From a very young age, I wanted to be a soldier, and so I did that for 12 years. And when around 2014, my own mental health was suffering greatly. I didn't realize at the time, but I was living with undiagnosed PTSD, moral injury, depression, anxiety, suicidality, and addiction. And so I sought help. I was rather forced to get help by my chain of command. I had to make a choice between getting help or going down the disciplinary route. And so that's what began my journey into mental health and wellness. And my first exposure was at a major mental health treatment facility, but I also found the 12 steps there, and that's what really propelled fueled my journey into recovery and into mental health wellness, into addiction recovery. Um, and I was fortunate enough to find the skills and the tools and the community of support to remain abstinent and to start building a life that I wanted to live for myself. And in that, in those early days of my original mental health recovery journey, a lot of other young men started asking me to help them. So I started working with other men and sharing what was working for me and helping people walk on the same path that I was walking down. And that's what really inspired me to want to get into this space. So I went back to school to study psychology. I studied trauma and addiction recovery, addiction treatments, specifically trauma-specific addiction treatment. And when I graduated, I started working in the field. So I've worked in withdrawal management. I've worked at adolescent addiction recovery centers with as a team leader for young boys between the ages of 12 and 21. And recently, I'm working at a large mental health and addiction service agency in London, Ontario, in a community opioid addiction program. And I'm working with folks there each and every day who come in and often greeted with their suicidality. So suicide prevention and life promotion is a big part of the work that I do today. I've been touched in my own personal life by suicide. My father also struggled with addictions and mental health and battled suicidal ideation. I've had great comrades and colleagues in the military who unfortunately ended their own lives after a long battle with mental health. And in my own mental health journey, I have also encountered suicidal ideation and had to find ways to make room for that and space for that and heal so that it doesn't, that's not a staple of my life today. I think I'm going to leave it there and get to the questions. Thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself.
That's great. Thank you, Brandon. And thanks to all of our panel members for sharing a little bit about yourselves and a little bit about your professional work. It's always, sensitive to be sharing your own information, talking about yourself and your experience, and that can be challenging for any of us. I really respect you for your willingness to do that for the good of our audience today. So I've got a few questions that I'd like to explore a bit deeper with all of the panel members. And just to start off with, suicide and suicide prevention is important for all of us. It touches all of us as people in Canada. Why is it important for us to talk about men's suicide and men's life promotion specifically?
Well, I can start. Too many men are killing themselves, plain and simple. And it's something that we don't talk enough about and we don't do enough about it. So I think events like this are absolutely critical to get the conversation going so that when people are struggling, they don't do it in silence, because for a lot of guys, there are too many barriers that they perceive in their way to reaching out for help, and they end up trying to go it alone. And especially when you're struggling with suicidality, it's such a beast. You can't do it on your own. You need people by your side, and the only way to invoke that help is to talk. And so we need to open up the conduits for conversation, not only about reducing barriers, stigma, but also engaging people if you perceive others struggling or you're struggling yourself.
I would also say that focusing on the ways that boys and men are it's experiencing harm also allows us to look at the system itself rather than just like, I would hope that we don't just leave it at like, oh, wow, you know, men's rights matter, but that we look at the system itself in terms of patriarchy, in terms of how patriarchy affects girls, women, and people of other genders, as well as boys and men themselves. And yeah, and the idea there is engaging boys and men as allies and stakeholders in challenging the like hierarchies and norms and sort of cultural expectations that we have with regards to what it means to become a man.
Great, thanks for that.
Yeah, I think an important piece to acknowledge, you know, when, especially when looking at Stats Canada, they attribute suicidality to socio, or at least with indigenous men and boys, they attribute it to socioeconomic characteristics. So low income housing, labor market status, level of education, marital status. And that's not really the focus and area. We know that, you know, from Stats Canada, and these are rough numbers, Indigenous First Nations men and boys are 3 times more likely to die by suicide. Métis is twice the time, and Inuit is nine times the in comparison to non-Indigenous. And so these numbers are significantly high, and you know, attributing it to you know, education levels and marital status, again, we're not hitting the mark. And when we look at First Nation bands, you know, over 60% of bands had reported a suicide rate of 0, or just had suicide rates of 0. So this is a major issue that we have here. I think the need to look at this critically, and begin having the conversations in and around with the men, with the youth, around why, and not just attributing it to, well, it's their education level, or we know that there are, you know, domestic violence issues. There are a lot of, you know, attributions, as Jonathan said, to gender-based violence. And if we begin looking at how to have conversations about creating plans, safety plans for individuals, that we might begin getting to a pathway where we're understanding the needs of individuals before it's too late.
Very good. Brandon or Henry, would you like to weigh in at all?
Yeah, I could follow that up with something that was, you know, thank you for that, Decca. I was thinking, when I think about, you know, these risk factors, you know, I think, why do we need to talk about them? And I think about them like, you know, what's underneath those factors, right? I think more deeply, like, and I think a lot of what I've encountered in my work and in personal life is that there's a lot of people who have there's a lot of pain, right? A lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of confusion underneath that desire to want to take your own life. And I think talking about it highlights that, right? And and first, you know, admitting to that, talking about it, opening a space, encourages people to share their own struggle. That's one other thing I'm thinking about. Why do we need to talk about men's suicide prevention? And I'm thinking about this piece of, as I was preparing for this talk, like meaning, personal meaning, and not necessarily in the way that we think about it. I think meaningful connection to self, to community, to society, to family, and to nature. All of these things that have been important for me, and I've watched have helped other men in my community build lives where they don't feel like they need to exit. That's what I'm thinking of right now.
Very good, thank you.
I think one critical area that I'd like to acknowledge, and especially with Dudes Club Society, we know that the conversations around suicide amongst men and boys need not just to be with men and boys. We know that a lot of our work, and you know, just looking in the chat, there's some amazing statements in and around understanding that we need to come together. And the idea of men's health and wellness, you know, we as men are able to cultivate and design that you know, the parameters or the rubric to what that means to be a healthy individual. But that needs to be encompassed within community, women, femme, transgender, LGBTQ, the whole spectrum need to be part of each aspect. So if we're looking at men's health, we need community to understand and define what men's health means from their perspective. And I think when it comes down to suicidality, a lot of it is, and as Adrian Schaefer had mentioned in the chat, there's this stigma and expectation that still is there, and in society and in media and in social media, even more scary, to be this alpha, this strong arm, this you know, knight in shining armor, as Adrian said, and there's a lot of pressure there. And so that's an area that we need to begin understanding and critically looking at.
That's great. Thank you for those comments. And I saw Henry sharing his appreciation for those comments as you were speaking. And you know, it brings me to a point that I started thinking about when Jonathan was doing your introduction, and you, I think the phrase you used was you were being called a fag before you knew what a fag was, which is something I can relate to. And I know that, you know, as now an adult gay man, that experience still colors the way that I reflect on my own self-image. So, you know, we see in the statistics that Indigenous men, as Deca was sharing, a higher rate, 2 to 3 to 9 times higher rates of suicidal thoughts or suicidal actions. We see as well other marginalized communities, including the 2S LGBTQ plus community, higher rates on a number of indicators, including suicidal thoughts and suicidal actions. And each of us brings our own culture, history, experiences with us into these conversations. So how important is it to ensure that supports and services are kind of bespoke to each of these groups, bespoke to the needs of Indigenous men, bespoke to the needs of the LGBTQ plus community or other communities, as opposed to you know, more broadly general kinds of services and supports?
Well, I can start again.
Sure, thanks.
I think both are needed. I think you absolutely need the general stuff, and then the bespoke supports and services are absolutely necessary. You know, one of the fundamental human need is to feel heard and understood, because without that, you feel isolated in your experience. And so without those services and supports and resources tailored to the specific needs of each group, you're not really going to be able to hit the mark right in the bullseye. And so I think it's, you know, the Dudes Club, for example, I'm familiar with. I love this program, and it's like we need many programs throughout the sort of spectrum of services, where we have very general services, as you were mentioning, Ed, to those specific services that are really speaking to the fundamental needs of the different groups of men. Because as Deca was talking about, we see the variety in risks associated with different groups. And, you know, one big hammer is not going to do it. You know, we need a finishing hammer to really do the fine work to make sure it's done right.
I think when it comes down to bespoke, one of the critical elements there, and thank you, John, for explaining that and you know, acknowledging our work. We know that every community, whether Indigenous, on reserve, off reserve, urban site, regardless of their cultural background or significance is a unique, bespoke approach. Your community, I grew up in New York City, and then moved into my own community in Kahnawake, and understanding that the immediate needs change. And you know, for Dudes Club, we focus on designing opportunities or helping the men design opportunities to create that bespoke approach for the needs in that community. I think a critical piece on there, and something that we really have to advocate and strive for, is whether in community, you know, health center or provincial health authorities or nationally, we have women's health, we have children's health, we have youth health, we have FTEs, full-time employment positions under those respective lines. We have financial budget line items under those. We don't have men's health. That is a major issue that we have. And if we're not going to actually create space to support men's health as an actual initiative that a community center takes on, that a financial partner takes on, then we're not going to move forward. And so again, that bespoke approach needs to be tailored to the immediate needs of that community, and any partnering organization or support or health authority in and around that region that support that community need to ensure that they have FTEs and budget line items. A great example of that is First Nations Health Authority in the North. That's a huge reason why you know, we've advanced some amazing, absolutely groundbreaking work in men's health, and a lot of that work I'd love, you know, Henry to share a little bit more about that, because he really was at the forefront of that.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Dega. Men's health. And when we look at First Nations communities, we're looking at creating safe spaces for our men to come in, creating that opportunity to understand that our culture is what we need to lean against in order to create that safe space, and allowing ourselves to communicate and share and work together, and understanding that our roles as men, as protector and provider, and always oversees our mental health and our emotional health, and trying to create a balance, and looking at when our men are the protectors and providers, they are out on work, and they don't have opportunity to access providers Monday to Friday. And when we were able to look at the 58 nations, and in the first year, we were able to implement 32 men's health groups in 1 year.
Wow.
Which was an amazing response, because we all knew that there was an aspect of men's health that needed to be paid attention to. And I really appreciated the Dudes Club and supporting in that endeavor, and looking at a structure response when it comes to facilitating, working with elders, working with the men, working with their community, and having a program that's designed by men for men to be implemented in community, which is harder to do than it is to say. Because when we look at our communities, there's a large, in the work field, there's a lot of women in the health field. And when we place the men's piece in there, sometimes it's heavily influenced by women to guide the process. We need our women to guide the process as well in a lot of things in life. But when it comes to men's health, we need our men's to find their voice, to be able to speak in a good way, to be able to conduct themselves in a good way in community, and allow that ability to strengthen themselves, to understand how mental health is needed for themselves, for myself, and for our communities to continue in a healing journey.
That's great, Henry. Thank you. Jonathan, Brandon, would either of you like to weigh in?
Yeah, what I would say is I wouldn't want the significance of relationship to be forgotten. So for example, one of the young guys that I work with, he's in grade 7, and a couple of weeks ago, he said he was skipping class. We were texting, and he said he was skipping. I said, "Aren't you supposed to be in class right now?" And he said, "I'm skipping class. Some other guy is making fun of me for like he's calling me gay and stuff." And and I said, "Oh, why? How did he get that in his head or something like that?" And this young guy said, "Well, I told him I liked him." So then in my head, I was like, "Oh, okay. So maybe I just learned something about this young kid's sexuality." A few weeks later, he's like totally drowning in schoolwork. And I know he works so hard in school. He's like up until 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night working on schoolwork. And I had a conversation with him where he was like, "It's really when I need to put words on paper, I just can't get it out." And I said, and then I paused and I was like, did you ever get like your letters mixed up? Did you have a hard time memorizing the alphabet? Did you are you able to conceptualize stuff and then you just can't put it into words? Like, we basically went through a couple of questions that was like a DIY diagnosis of dyslexia. And he was like, "You hit the nail on the head." And I was like, "You're not stupid. Like it sounds like you might have a learning disability." And no one had ever identified with that over 7 years in school. And so the point of saying this is, like, I didn't engage this young kid in a program directly targeting gay youth. And I didn't engage this kid in a program for youth with learning disabilities. I engaged this kid by establishing, a close and authentic relationship with him, where I said, "I care about you. I will spend time with you. I will learn about you and your interests and be aware of the things that you're struggling with." And so, yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously value in groups, programs, and interventions focusing on specific intersections of identity. But I think that one of the greatest things that they offer is a relationship, and that relationship can happen anywhere there's a practitioner willing to put in that time and effort.
Very good. Thank you, Jonathan. I want to pick up on a point that you raised about the significance of relationships, and it was kind of a theme that came out from other panelists' comments as well about social isolation as a major factor in men's mental health and well-being. And it's in many cases, I think it is about a relationship with an authentic counselor, authentic professional, but perhaps even more often, it's engagement and relationship and support from others with shared experience, with lived or living experience. Can we talk a bit about the importance of the lived and living experience perspective when we talk about men's mental health and men's suicide prevention? And Brandon, you've done quite a bit of work around peer support. Maybe we could start with you.
Sure. I would say for many people, it's the having an honest peer openly share their struggle is the door through which people walk into the healing journey. I know for myself, it was such a man who shared openly about his confusion around his sexual identity, about his struggle with being abused as a young person, about trauma, about addictions, about the places where it took him. And I had never in my life heard another human being speak so freely and so openly about their inner world and about the things that they had been through and about how it affected them. But importantly, about the fact that they were healing from it and living a meaningful, engaged, connected life, despite the fact that they had been through all of these things. And so I think that's the value of the lived experience perspective, is the hope that it provides. And more than having access to programs, more than awareness campaigns, more than any of the other things that we do, I think that a peer who can communicate effectively about their journey cuts through the shame, cuts through the confusion, it cuts through the lack of hope more quickly than anything else. And almost in a blinding flash, I've seen this for myself. A whole world perspective can change instantly, just instantly. And I think it's something like, you know, our human capacity for empathy awakens in the presence of someone's honest self-reflection. And then you get the ability to reflect on your own self in a way that you never would have been able to otherwise. So, and you know, I've engaged. I mean, I'd say the 12 steps. I mean, when we say peer support in the mental health field, we don't often. I don't know if 12 steps often gets lumped into that bucket often. I know that it gets excluded and for a number of reasons, but that peer support community is unbelievable in a number of ways. Like I remember, for example, when the pandemic happened, like 24 hours later, there was all of the meetings across North America were going online like this, because we were the need to stay connected to the peer group, the tribe, the communities is fundamental. And peer support's the best, I think. Long story short.
Yeah, I think with that question is like lived experiences, looking at I believe that we all have a sense of knowing and how to move through things in our lives. And when we're able to share that with another person who is also, like when I speak, I say about Indigenous piece and how culture has been there to guide us through a lot of different things in our lives. And being able to show how to move that emotion through our culture and how that assists us in helping us share or even to look at processing our emotions as men. And like I've heard many stories from many men who have struggled with suicide and ideation, but I also heard the stories of how they processed with the traditional dancing and how their emotion comes through there. And that's where they take that opportunity to process their emotions, is by allowing that culture to guide them through that. And when we are taught that if we are never alone, we are always with our ancestors, and to know that and to witness that from the time we were born has allowed us to know that we have an inner strength that can guide us through a lot of different things in life and allow us a safe space to process our feelings. And that's what the majority of it is. When I witness men who are struggling with it's the big emotions. And I was talking with a youth just last week, and just out of the blue, it was like he's having ideations on suicide. And I'm like, what is it? But he didn't understand that there was a huge connection with our like drumming a song and how to allow that emotion to flow through it and allow that space to be given to not only sing the song that our ancestors have given us, but also to allow that emotion to go, to let it go without having to hold it, right? And he understood it, right? Because when you talk in a language that is unknown to you, it's very hard to understand what they're trying to say to you. But if you speak in a language and content that is they can understand, they just move through it and they understand, and they're able to just move into that next space of life. And that's what I really appreciate about our culture. And I love sharing that.
I think you hit a point that I want to kind of address, is that this idea of moving through emotion and the development of self-empathy. For myself, and sharing quite an activating or triggering experience. So just being mindful of that to the audience. there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear when not knowing how to control a situation, when not having a safety plan, when cops, cops get involved, or a larger kind of control or power gets involved. Fear comes into place, and not having, I think that, and this comes back to social isolation and limited circles of support, not knowing who to go to, and you're kind of stuck into a corner. I personally had my partner who navigated his life in a way that he didn't have social circles, he didn't have support. And when a big situation had come up, where fear was the, fundamentally put him into a corner, I end up having an argument with him and walking out, and just the fear behind his realities that he had to navigate without having self-empathy or having that strength or having connections to support, resulted in this individual attempting to take his own life from him. For myself, walking back into the room and having to physically lift him up and save him and resuscitate him in that space is not only incredibly traumatic, but it did something. And I want us to be very mindful of this, is it did something to me, especially after, thank goodness that, we were able to get support and medical assistance and save his life to return. And he did not want to go and talk about it again. He didn't want to seek help. He didn't want to seek support. He was embarrassed, ashamed. And it goes right back in that social isolation. And so, even as a partner, it's a critical piece. But speaking to that and being very mindful, and I'll go a little bit deeper in this one with vulnerability, is hearing, my partner talk about his experience of what happened and the visceral feeling, and how, as he described it, this beautiful departure went into my head. And there had been times thereafter where, for my own personal space, it got challenging, it got compromising. I felt like I was, in my own corner and had no supports and no one to talk to. You forget, right? You become this isolated individual. And that story kicked in. And for me, it was a scary place, because I sat there saying, well, if it was that beautiful and that, that beautiful of a journey, then it must not be that hard to do it and then go about it. And so I had to catch myself in my own space saying, I'm going into suicidal ideation. I'm convincing myself, based on someone else's experience, that this is an okay thing to do, that it will be a beautiful journey, and then I will leave. And you get to a point where you have to catch yourself. You have to catch yourself, because you start down that path. And so I want to be mindful that when it comes down to it, having the supports and the services and this and that around you, if you are not connected, if you don't have someone who's reaching out and saying, hey, you were a little off today, is everything okay? Not knowing, they mean nothing to us. They really don't mean nothing to us, because when you're isolated and you're alone, and we've all experienced this as human beings, when you're isolated and alone, you begin that self-alienation, that no one cares about you, no one loves you. And it sometimes can be overpowering. And in many unfortunate cases, that is the result and the storyline. So I would love for us to begin understanding how we create that, again, how to create a connection outward, or just check in, saying I love you. Some of my closest friends and good buddies of mine, I always say I love you. And if you're off, let me know, give me a call. Or if I sense something on their social media or how they're acting or whatever, I fired them a message saying something's wrong. I see something wrong. It might not be. I might be just a little bit crazy, but I love you and I'm here and I just want to talk to you for 5 minutes. That has significantly changed, I think, the relationships and the sense of worth, and has elevated my own ability to establish a stronger self-empathy within myself. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Are you trying to say, okay?
I was, but go ahead, Brandon. I just wanted to say before you go ahead, Brandon, thank you so much, Dega, for your willingness to be vulnerable and share that. These are difficult topics, but it's through storytelling that we're able to learn and understand in a more effective way. It is a heavy topic, and if anyone is impacted by this discussion, remember Joshua Brower is available, and if you didn't jot down his email address, it can be, I'll ask that it be added to the chat again, please. So over to Brandon.
Thanks. Yeah, and Deg, a really profound thing you said there, and I think I just want to pick up on something you said about the sense that I am not lovable, right? There's at the center of a lot of suffering that I've encountered in myself as well as in others is this sense like I'm not lovable. No one's gonna love me. I don't belong. I'm worthless. I'm invaluable, and I see it day in and day out, and and I find trying to speak to that pain that's within somebody, and to try to tear it down has been most of what I do on a day-to-day basis, because I often see people they come into the clinic and they're in unbelievably complex situations. They're using fentanyl, crystal meth, they're experiencing homelessness, they're justice involved, they have children who are involved with CAS, they have all kinds of health complications. And in the center of all of that is a person who's collapsing around the idea that I am not enough. I can't handle it. I am unlovable. I'm valueless, and so that it's like I think that finding a way to communicate to that and encourage people just a little bit to say, no, you are enough. You matter, and if nobody else told you today, you matter to me, and that's why I'm sitting here in front of you. And it's unbelievable how much that speaks to people. Just a few encouraging words and they start crying, they start bawling, they because there's not enough of that out there. There really isn't enough of that that level of communication happening between people in relationships in society. And we talk a little bit about the masculine norms. Like if you don't meet this set of criteria, then for some reason you're not valuable, right? And that's obviously a load of trash. And finding ways to make people feel valuable is super important, because they matter. People are important. And I remember when I did assist training, they asked this question at the top. If anybody's done assist training, they say, is suicide wrong? That's the question. Is suicide wrong? And it's intentionally loaded question, right? I mean, but it's a leading question, but what it does is it's to raise a conversation. And I think the conversation is that all things being equal, would you not prefer your brother or your sister or your mother or your cousin or your friend or your lover to feel valued and loved enough that they would stick around to try to find meaning in life and to try to find some way to enjoy this sliver of existence that we've been granted by creation? And that is I think at the center of that impulse to want to die is that there's I don't belong here, and I want to try to speak to that in people.
Great, thank you, Brandon. So this is a really important discussion, and it's highlighting the incredible value of peer support and the incredible value of engaging lived experience. I think for many of us, lived experience is thought of as separate from and distinct from professional experience or academic experience. How do you navigate respecting all of those perspectives? John?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to recognize that lived experience is expertise. I think it's the most valuable expertise. And in fact, I don't think we're advancing at all if we don't privilege those experiences and expertise as we develop resources, whether they're general or bespoke. It's all the same. We need that. And just to carry on from, the aspect of storytelling, valuing sharing oneself, one's story. I think the importance and power of that really can't be overstated. It helps with so much. Men by and large need permission from other guys to talk. And so if we're not talking, we're not creating, and we've used this word a lot, the space for others to share. When we share ourselves, we're creating an opportunity to feel heard and understood and to experience care and empathy and compassion from others. It's reducing stigma, and it's informing at a higher level, if you will, what we actually need to do to shape the resources and services to actually meet the needs of people based on what we know from their experiences.
I just want to say something real quick. Normalizing suicide ideations, understanding that we all have twisted thoughts. Every day we have a twisted thought. Is that a suicide ideation? Right? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. What do we need to address? So what is it that we're looking at? Are we only looking at people who are just stating those ideations? Or do we look at each and every one of us and we look at our twisted thoughts that we have each day? COVID was a prime example of that. It created a lot of twisted thoughts. What happens with someone when we can't see them? What's going to happen to us when we can't see someone else? Right? When we normalize that suicide is a thought that we all have, we can all see that every one of us are vulnerable. And not just the persons that's stating that they are having the ideation, right? Once we create that space and create that unity, we're allowing ourselves to move forward and allowing who we are sitting with to understand that we all have twisted thoughts on a regular basis, and it's how we sit with it and how do we create space with it is important to know how to process it and move forward. And I just think that it should be encompassed in every program. Doesn't matter what it is.
I think a big piece of this, and just reading some of the comments in the chat, which are incredible as well, is this idea that we need, again, as Henry said, we need to normalize these conversations, especially amongst men, masculine identifying, LGBTQ. Like, we need to normalize these conversations because we have our wall up amongst each other, and if someone mutters a small bit of their experience about what had happened to them or what they had to experience in whatever respect, that is an invitation for support. That is an invitation for communication, and that's amongst men, it's very rare that you hear that kind of pinhole within the armor saying, well, I've been through that too. And I can just kind of look back on even the last week of my work, my own professional and personal life, hearing small little kind of pins that are going through my own armor, and looking at someone saying they're experiencing something. I'm experiencing that too. And it gets to that space of that awkward unsettling of, we don't know how to support each other. And some of the biggest, I think the most profound impact that we have is just looking at someone and saying, I know what you mean, I'm there too. And opening that space up on, that it takes a powerful person to say, do you want to speak about it more, or can I share mine with you? And I think just going about that process, you're starting a healing pathway. And I think with the work that we do in and around men's health, and especially around Dudes Club Society, that's exactly what we do. We focus on, we can't have conversations until you have a relationship. And it's very unfortunate and sad, and it's a long haul, because the simplest thing that we could ultimately do is come into space and say, I need to share something with you. I need you all 6 of you here. I need your support right now because I'm falling hard. The minute someone can hear that and look at you, that level of vulnerability is such a powerful strength of saying, I got you, what do you need? But we don't know how to do that. And so, Dudes Club Society focuses on the long haul of creating the relationship, of seeing people every second Thursday, or having a dinner, or playing, poker next to them, and they giggle and make laughs, and, they watch a game, and then out of nowhere, they see that opportunity of, I want to say something. So, there's a long haul approach to it, and there's a simple approach to it. And yet, we're still in that kind of catch-22.
That's great. And thank you for those comments. And it's a perfect segue into the next question that I have, but I'd like to hear from Brandon first.
Thanks, Ed. I think the original question was, how do you navigate lived experience and professional academic research experience?
Yes.
It's something I've been thinking about quite a lot, because I work within rather large systems of care, and often these systems are built by academics or researchers or program designers, and what gets missed at the ground level, I think, in these data-driven, systems-driven approach to, let's say, mental health and addiction treatment, is somehow it gets lost that there's a person sitting at the end of that system. And as a professional, and as a person with lived experience working within the field, I just want to reiterate the point to everybody out there: program designers, managers, systems level thinkers. We can't inundate the individual with paperwork, with assessment, with multiple appointments before you see a counselor, or because what it dehumanizes the person who's looking for help. Okay, they become a stat, they become a data point, they become all of the things that we claim that we're trying to avoid when we're dealing with individuals and working within systems. And so, again, Dega, you just keep saying these wicked things. Can't have conversations without a relationship, right? That's the first thing, right? You want to bring somebody into a system, the doorway has to be a relationship and not an assessment.
Great, thank you. So we've got just about 10 minutes left until we go to break, and I would love to spend that time hearing from each of you about within your own programs, your own initiatives, your own research, how do you define this? How do you define success? And what have you seen as the impact of your work?
I'll hop in. Success is a little bit difficult when you're talking about prevention, primary prevention, because it's the question of how do you measure something that never happened, so it is a challenging thing. And I'd say so far with Next Gen Men's Youth Programming, often it lives within the specific sort of qualitative stories about young people themselves. I've shared a couple of stories about the youth that we work with, and I've probably got 1,000 of those, and they live in my heart, and they live, in the work that we do. And I think if I was thinking about it at from a programmatic standpoint, I would share that So like I mentioned, we started this Discord server during COVID. So it's over 2.5 years old, and about probably half a year ago or a little bit longer, youth said we would like a space specifically to talk about mental health in this space. So on the Discord server, we play Minecraft, we talk about basketball and stuff like that. And they said we have talked about mental health stuff over the years, but they say we want a specific safe space where we can support each other and be present as we navigate different challenges in our lives. And so in setting that up, I did some collaboration with young people who they created a set of guidelines for themselves. And you have to sort of read through and accept these guidelines to become part of that space. And some of the guidelines, I just have it open over here. Some of the guidelines, they said, when you're responding to other people, respect and accept other people's experiences, avoid problem solving unless other people ask for advice, avoid labeling, judging or comparing, and be thoughtful and curious. And to me, young people basically are the experts on what they need in their lives. And so for me, a success is having, like a couple of people have already said, the relationships in which we can do this kind of work together, and also young people sort of take ownership of a space in which they can design for their own vulnerability and support. That's a success. But it's a huge question. I just thought I'd share that little snapshot of how they made, how they made peer support even more trustworthy and impactful.
Wonderful, thank you.
Not all at once, please.
I sorry, I was just thinking about, Jonathan, what you said there. I'm reminded about something I read in Maslow about a counselor type figure. It talks about a meta counselor, that they should be more like a big brother and want the best for their not they don't want their little brother to become them. They want their little brother to become the best version of themselves, right? And so when you're giving advice, when you're trying to problem solve, when you're trying to do everything a bad counselor, big brother, or teacher does, you're not allowing a human being to express their potential to figure it out for themselves. And that I just really like that idea. I think that what you said is awesome. So basically what I'm saying. So.
Thanks, Brandon.
I think for me, it's just more just looking at the increased healthy conversations amongst our families and amongst our communities and amongst our employment place, and just allowing that ability to feel safe, to be able to just speak to, like how Diego was talking about, noticing that something's off today and just being able to acknowledge it. And when you acknowledge that piece, then we're able to feel safe to just speak to it a little bit for that day. And in the urban settings, like you can, like in Vancouver, for example, is you can walk down the street and everyone has their head down walking, and you walk by each other and they just get startled when you say hello. All right. And it's just like, what? Someone addressing me? What's going on? Right. So just having that change in our environment and the ability to have conversations, because technology does take that away from us too.
That's great. Thank you, Henry. John?
Well, I have different roles, and success looks different in each of those roles. With the stuff with Heads Up Guys, it's, can be defined by a number of people, or like we get 60,000 plus people a month coming to this thing. And so it's filling a big need. And when we hear from visitors saying, you helped me reach out for help, you helped me feel not alone, we get that one a lot. Because when people are suffering, they often feel very isolated in that experience. And knowing that other people know what that feels like is really big. That universality aspect that allows you to feel heard and understood. We actually get quite a few people saying, you know, of paraphrasing, thanks, you saved my life. You know, that's a big one for us. You know, that's the ultimate success for us. And it helps create conversation as well. It normalizes conversation about mental health and suicidality in particular. It breaks down stigma, it empowers people, inspires hope. All of that is really important. You know, clinically, success is going to be defined by each and every person that comes in. You know, for men, I often find success early when they actually walk through my door, or I have them on the screen for a Zoom session. And it's like, yes, that's actually a really, really big step right there. And I'm happy. And you know, we work and it's like, what do you want to get out of this? You know, Brandon said something about best version of yourself. Ultimately, that's what we're working toward. How can we help you become the best version of yourself? You're not weak or broken or different when you come for therapy. It's like you're actually taking control. You're the master of your shit. You know, this is going to be hard work. I tell guys, it's like probably the hardest thing you'll ever do in your life. But if you can, you know, tough it out and really work and go through the trenches, because we will, you're going to be a better person for it. And you know, when therapy is done, you know, when they find that they actually like themselves, you know, that may sound so simple, but we've already heard it a number of times this morning. And it's like when a person can honestly like themselves, love themselves, be happy with who they are, for me, that's an amazing success there. They find purpose and meaning in life. They find joy and pleasure. They have fulfilling relationships. Those are all successes. And I guess from a research perspective, you know, the ultimate success is that the work that we do somehow actually has a practical, tangible application in the real world, that it helps move the yardsticks just a little bit. And I think fundamentally, coming back to an issue we talked about earlier, is that without invoking the expertise of lived experience, our research isn't going to have that capacity to be useful in the real world. We need that as part of the package, so to speak.
Great, thanks, John. And Decca, before I'll give you you and your friend the last word before the break.
Well, I think what, you know, how we define success within both the research programs and initiatives, and what is positive impact for Dudes Club Society and Next Up initiative is the community, or the site, the collective of those individuals take on the role of leadership themselves. You know, with Next Up, we developed this back in 2020 as a means to engage youth, to bring facilitation together and go through Health by Self fun initiatives there that, you know, go-karting, great example. We went go-karting, and you let the youth talk about what health means through go-karting, you know, drinking and driving, partnership, looking out for people. And we've developed really a really beautiful kind of ratio of fun and serious health, you know, health pieces, Health by Self. And I think impact for us is now, you know, what we see as success is Next Up is led by 2 youth, one who came out of our first cohort, who is now a staff member leading the initiative. We're going on to the 3rd iteration of that, and our next group of youth are talking about traveling to Tofino or traveling to Toronto. And I said, you know what? We can do that. We can make that happen. What are you going to go there for? Who are you going to contact, and why are you going to go help? And it's removing this idea of the white savior mentality of we want to go there to help, but at the same note, if you're going to go there to help, then you have to explain your own experience of why you want to go. And it moves that space of we learn more about ourselves as the teacher teaching someone else about what they need, in that space. So I think success for us is seeing not only youth, but men coming into that leadership role saying, I am a champion of this work and I'm going to help the next person. And this is why I'm a champion, because this is what I had to go through. This is a struggle. This is where, the danger points that I went through. And I managed to navigate out of it because of A, B, C, and D. And these are just the 4 pieces that I can give to you. And when you get out of that space of, systematic, you're a number, and just seeing you're a human who's trying to help another human. Dudes Club is the same way. Like we're not a branded initiative. We have nations and communities say, well, but we don't want Dudes Club because we don't want the branding. And we're like, that has nothing to do with it. We have multiple sites that are just men's health doing the work. We're there to ensure that the work is getting done however that looks. And I think that's where we need to pivot. Our success is a result of being able to say, we're here to just to be another hand to lift up that space. So I think that's what success looks like for us in our impact.
Wonderful and well said. Thank you. So we are going to take a short break, and it's seriously a very short break. Just enough time for a bit of bio need and maybe a glass of water. So please join back at 3:05. And at that time, we've got some questions that have been put forward by our audience that we will share with you. So see you in 5 minutes. All right, welcome back. I hope you're all back and had a chance to take care of your needs during that quick break. Welcome back, and we now have some time for some audience-generated questions for our panel members. I'd like to remind you that in order to put your question forward, just enter it into the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and both of those are at the bottom panel of your screen. We may not have time to get to all of the questions, although we are monitoring the questions in the chat and the Q&A. And if you think of a question afterwards, feel free to reach out to my colleague at the Mental Health Commission, Haley White. That's HWHITE@mentalhealthcommission.ca. And if you send Haley your questions, she can also try to connect with panel members for some responses afterwards. But we are getting some questions already, and I'm very happy to share with the panel members what our audience is putting forward. And the first question I have is this: I'm at the policy level, and I often encounter resistance to the concept of incorporating lived and living experience or peer support because everyone has lived experience. Can you talk about the process of both normalizing mental health, addictions, and suicidality among everyone while valuing the process of peer support?
I think every funder sets guidelines on what they're allowing a person to conduct in their research or their work. And it's always a qualitative response when it looks at peer experience, right? And how that alters the engagement and reduces suicide. And it's very challenging. I think it's where it has to start is with funders most times, and allowing them that understanding that whatever role that we're, or whatever space we're working with people who are looking at suicide ideations or prevention, that it needs to change from the top down. And that's kind of one of the beginning pieces, because you have to find creative ways in how to say that this is a peer, not a counselor, like they want, right? So, because majority of the time that lived experience is more valued than or more accessible than a counselor or a psychologist in a community.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I actually hear this myself in my own work. Often I'll hear from when promoting including the voice of lived experience in programming or activities, we'll hear, well, everyone's had some mental health experience. So even though they may be, a healthcare administrator or a business person, they also have lived experience. And it can sometimes be difficult to promote lived experience as a unique experience, its own, there for its own sake, rather than being kind of an add-on to someone else's job. Have you encountered that at all in your work, Brandon?
Yes, not where I currently am, but I do think it is in disentangling the difference in the approach that a peer support worker takes versus what a counselor or professional helper takes, and trying to make that argument clear, but also backed with research, which I'm sure this person is trying to do because they're a policy advocate. I find that peers traverses a wide range of types of people, right? And I know that there are programs in place and organizations working hard to try to professionalize the peer support worker industry, right? Because I think there's an idea out there that sometimes although people have lived experience moving through their various different mental health challenges, that they're not necessarily equipped to provide services to others who are in a very vulnerable or precarious position. And so I think what I've seen in the industry where peer support has been brought on is that often these peer support workers have some kind of credential. They've gone through some kind of formal training. And that lends one a little bit more confidence in that peer and a little bit more credibility to that peer as well, I think. And those two things are important, especially to systems level thinkers and designers who are used to working within credentialized systems, acquiring professional designations, and all of the confidence and what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, prestige or not prestige, just the professional that it seems more legit. That's to find the word for that. I'm running out of words there, but that's I think the challenge that peer support workers are facing in the industry.
Great, thank you for those comments, Brandon. The next question I have is specifically regarding older men. And the question is this: my experience in suicide prevention is that we often mention the higher risk of suicide in this population, but have little resource or tools to support them. Do you have any suggestions for supporting and engaging older men in life promotion?
Well, I'm not sure what cohort that's referring to, 50 plus, 65 plus. But I think, we have to come back to the conversation we were having earlier about bespoke approaches. And so what we may be doing with younger men, older boys, is probably not going to work with older gents. We have to meet them where they're at. One of the initiatives that comes to mind right away, and it's aligned with the model that Dudes Clubs take, is men's sheds. And this is a place, men's sheds evolved out of Australia, and it's now across Canada, Ireland, United States, and other places. And it's a space where guys can come together. And although it's not shaped explicitly around a place for older men in particular, it often attracts them because a lot of guys, their connections, their sense of identity to a large part revolves around their work. And when they become disconnected from their work, say through retirement, they lose an aspect of how they see themselves. Who am I without that work? But they also lose connections to other people. And so they often find themselves alone and isolated. And men's sheds can provide them with that space. And so while it may be, well, this is a place where we can play pool, do some woodworking or other, I'll tell you, that's just the ruse, if you will. It allows people to engage in doing something, but through that doing something, being shoulder to shoulder, it allows them to form connections, to share, to get that support and connection that they really want.
Yeah, I agree with you, John. I think one piece, and looking at the different demographics and, old versus young or older men, really, when you step back, the same process is there. You know, it's about bringing people together, you know, where youth have a significantly higher challenge at engaging socially. The men are doing the same thing. One of the critical pieces I think we need to focus on is the supports and services need to be, again, that bespoke piece, and knowing that just because someone is older, and this is a little bit perplexing from in the sense that, well, they're older, so you know they don't have much life left, so you know they're damaged goods, just leave them alone and let's make them, you know, leave them in space, and that's completely wrong. You know, when we work in spaces that men are calling themselves together, and when visiting sites and Dudes Club Society connections, if you actually, you know, whether it's a men's shed or out on the land or, you know, playing bingo, if you close your eyes there in that moment, if you close your eyes and just listen to the conversations that are happening, these are little boys. These are little boys talking, they're yelling at each other, they're arguing with each other, and that's what we have to remind ourselves. You know, there's a lot of us are still navigating our adverse childhood experiences, and then however that gets exacerbated from our adult living experiences. Having that space together in a closed space, a space of safety where they can remove that armor and just engage with one another and joke and tease each other, and have, you know, have those grounders, whether that's an elder or another youth there to say like, hey, be careful, right? That space of no judgment. When you close your eyes and you realize these are just little boys hanging out with one another, trying to find a friend, trying to find a connection. And I think if we can apply the same methodology of work and just meet the needs of those individuals at their age, you know, their generational interests, to make things fun and engaging and interesting, there's going to be someone who is only going to come in for food. We see people only coming in for food. They don't want to talk, they don't want to hear, they just want the food. But over that time, they start to listen in. They start to understand, well, what is being, we're all nosy in our own respect. And when there's an interest or a perceived interest of a group, there's a natural curiosity to lean into it a little bit more. And we've seen results of that where men are just coming in for a moment. And then next thing you know, they're having conversations with a health practitioner talking about, well, I heard there's something, you know, I need to get my prostate checked. What is a prostate anyway? That's an impact. And I think that's where we need to look at, is understanding that there is a methodology there, and it's no different. We need to adapt it bespoke to the generation as well as to the community.
Very good. And I love the way you've described that. Thank you. Here is, I think we have time for just one more question. And here it is. As someone who works in the field of research and therapy, how can we change cultures in this field around how to approach therapeutic practice with men?
I guess that's directed to me. Can you say it again? I'm not quite getting the.
So in the field of research or in a therapeutic practice, how do we change the culture in such a way to approach practice with men more effectively?
The culture of therapy,
Yes.
research. Well, I think first and foremost, you have to recognize it's an important space to be working in. And, you know, as I was saying, you know, I'm not aware of, outside of our program, anybody in Canada doing academic work in this space. And so I'm not really sure what to attribute that to. So there's that. I think changing the culture as well, you know, it's kind of reflecting on the conversation we've had over the last couple of hours, understanding why it's so important, bringing in that lived experience to guide where those research efforts ought to be directed, because you can go in a million different directions, but that lived experience is so critical in allowing us to hone in to focus on aspects that really are going to make, potentially have an impact. And then through the knowledge translation aspect, because, the reality of academics is that we're often doing work for other researchers, so they cite our stuff. That's a sad reality of it. And, you got to get big impact factors through the journals that you publish your work. But if you really want to do research that's going to make a difference, it's not about getting into the best journals. It's about getting it into the hands of people who are actually doing the work. And I think that's so important. And I actually don't know how to change the culture within academia to privilege that kind of research over research that's being published in grand journals with large impact factors that I would argue not a single clinician reads.
I just want to make mention, to change that culture, we need to change the culture of understanding what therapy is. Within every community, and this is, a kind of a tilt of my hat to Brandon, as he shared earlier, is this idea of, maybe this academic approach to, this is what therapy is, and these are credentials behind and designations behind that. When you have a group of men sitting down and just talking in a circle, when you have someone who, for whatever reason, I'm going to take you out for a beer, or we're going to go fishing, or let's just go for a walk, or I need help fixing my truck, or, I want to go dance. Whatever, that's therapy. That is therapy. And we need to begin, a lot of the work that we do in the research that Dudes Club Society focuses on is working with the men to identify what that means. It's not again, that colonial structure of, we're going to determine what therapy is, and then we're going to study and learn it, and then write and put that into the right hands. As you said, it's a matter of whose hands they go in, but it's also who's writing that, who's defining what that therapy is. And within a community, that's going to change fundamentally. And once you understand what those impacts or those critical those golden ratios in the community for that generation, what that therapy is, then that's what you need to study. That's what the health director needs to understand. That's where you need to support, and that's where you need to change policy. So there is a fundamental shift, not so much on the nature of the work, but rather the way we're approaching and looking at it.
All right, thank you. So the last question is my own, and I'll pose it to each of you, do a bit of around the screen. And it's a simple yet difficult question when you consider that our audience today is quite broad, from across the country, coast to coast to coast, people from coming from all different kind of perspectives. If there were one thing that you would like to make sure that audience members give some more thought and consideration to after this webinar is over, what do you think that one important thing that you'd like them to focus on would be? And I'll start with you, Jonathan.
I think I would probably say essentially, if you're not having vulnerable, supportive conversations with the boys and young men in your life, then you're part of the problem. Right. And what I mean by that is, not everybody is a registered clinician or, an experienced counselor or whatever that might be, but every single one of us is connected to young people, whether they're in our classrooms or in our families or in our neighborhoods. And, it's our duty and our responsibility to be looking out for the well-being of those young people. And the idea that boys, aren't interested in like emotional connected relationships is not just a myth, but a really harmful it's like foundation for a lot of the bullshit that, that boys and men go through. And to really adequately challenge that myth, we've got to be connected to those boys and sometimes I'll literally just text a kid, and be like, mental health check-in, what's up? And And yeah, so that's my takeaway is when was the last time you really put yourself out there and reached out to that 12-year-old, to that 13-year-old, said, I'm thinking of you and I want to hear, what you're struggling with.
Great, thank you. Well said. Brandon, same question.
Yeah, I was just really listening to that response. What's one? I guess something similar to that. Like check in with yourself. Like how are you doing, right? Like give yourself that time and attention, because we're here talking about how to prevent suicide in others, but in order to be that person, we have to be well ourselves, and self-care has to be a super important piece of this as well, because we can't. If I'm not well, then I can't be there for others to support them and when they need me, right? So how are you doing? Check in, reach out for yourself too, and that's what I would say. Take care of yourself.
Thank you. That self-care is so critically important. Decca.
I think we know that motion 147 on the what was it, the federal framework for suicide prevention was voted in unanimously. We know that. We know there's commitment to do the work. I think where we're caught up is a prescribed approach, and we need to keep things grounded. So ensuring that however you can advocate to ask the heavy questions, where's that budget line item? Where's that FTE? How come it's not here? We have that women's health, children's health, youth health. Where's men's health? Where's the commitment to there? Where's the financial resources and backing that? Because a lot of times we can have those deep, conversations. And I love what Jonathan said about, if you are not having those conversations, you are part of the problem. And I think that's the personal side of it. And then in that same space, if you don't have the resource and support and advocacy to have those conversations and hold people accountable, then your organization is part of that problem too. So you need to ensure that you are questioning, where's that budget line item? Where's the budget for that? Where's the resources? Who's the FTE? How much are we going to commit to this and keep it sustainable? But number one piece beyond all of that is keep it grounded to the people and the generations and the root of who you're serving, that community, the generations within that community, because they are going to prescribe what health means. We're only there to share the tools and resources with them.
Great. So that's more than think about. That's a call to action.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. John, the most important message that you'd like audience members to think about?
There's a lot of great advice that's already been given. I'm going to go really upstream here with this and speak primarily to those people that are online that have a child. Tell them you love them for just who they are, and be really honest and authentic about it, and don't do it once. Do it all the time. It may sound like a really, really simple thing. It's the most profound thing that you can do for your child.
Thank you, John. I love it. And Henry, over to you.
Thank you. I think for me, it's just looking at being open-minded, to know that there's more than one approach that can help a person as they go find their healing journey, and just to keep it simple, and to know that, like John says, just saying I love you, and are you okay, right? And just knowing that calls to action is an important piece in our lives that we need when we look at reconciliation, and knowing that how colonization has impacted many communities and peoples, that we need to continue to strive to move forward.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you all of the wonderful panelists for sharing your time with us today, your expertise. I have no doubt that this webinar will contribute to the collective efforts to offer comprehensive approaches to suicide across the country. It's been so informative. If you'd like to know more about the tools, resources, and information on suicide prevention that have been developed or curated by the Mental Health Commission of Canada, they're on our website. Please take a look there, mentalhealthcommission.ca. There you will find recordings of our past webinars, and this one will appear there as well in a short time. There are evidence briefs, fact sheets, toolkits, and much more. If you'd like to know more about our work specifically on mental health and suicide prevention for men, we invite you to check out the resources that we have highlighted on the screen. And finally, to all of you in the audience, thank you for attending today, for your interest in this topic area, and for your enthusiasm in staying with us. This brings us to the end of the webinar, but there will be some polling questions coming up on the screen shortly, and I would invite and encourage you to take a moment to answer those polling questions. Again, responses are kept anonymous. The first question, please rate your level of knowledge with men's suicide prevention. Just looking to my team, is there another polling question? Perhaps not. Perhaps that's the end of the polling questions. So on the screen, you see Haley White's email address. If you've got questions or would like any more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to Haley. And again, thank you all for spending this time with us today. Take care.